Welcome back to the Measure Pod with me, Daniel Perry-Reed. I'm a principal analytics consultant and trainer at MeasureLab. And as always, we've got Bhav Patel, Director of Experimentation and Analytics at LeanConvert. This is episode 103 of the Measure Pod. We've just finished recording with me, Bhav, and our guest, Ken Williams. And we recorded this on the 15th of July, 2024, for all those people that might be listening in the future. So, Bhav, you went into this saying that you had it's not your thing. It's not your area of expertise. What did you think? What did you make? And well, let's go from there.
Yeah, I love this recording. It was really nice meeting Ken. He's got so much valuable information to share with the world. And he says, I know we talked about it towards the end of the episode. We are kind of like the first ones through the wall talking about some of these things. He calls it modern marketing. I call it measurement strategy, and it's effectively it's two sides of the same coin. So as soon as he started talking about modern marketing, what he means by it, also the transformation from like marketing from 2020 to 2000 to 2020, you do realize we've come a long way, and actually the advice we would give 10 years ago is not the same we would give now. So I'm sold. I think this is a fantastic episode. I was telling you before, I think this episode has been really stimulating for me personally, both for the mind but for the soul as well. So it's really, really great to record.
Oh, I'm great to hear, because I thought I was just kind of like getting someone in my world to come on the show and talk to me about stuff that I already agree with. So I'm glad you're coming at it from that perspective. I've been thinking about the same stuff. Like, I've never labeled it as modern marketing, although I've started calling it that now. I know that Ken jokes about trademarking it. We're not allowed to use it unless we pay him $1, but I think I might owe a lot of money in that swear jar, as it were. But yeah, I find it fascinating. Labeling it is really important, actually, to brand this, to call it something. Otherwise, it becomes a fluffy, floaty kind of like just get with it, things have changed kind of vibe. So I really like that. For everyone listening and watching, all of the links to what we discuss are in the show notes, especially Ken's posts around modern marketing, what they are. You don't have to have read them before listening to this episode, but feel free to jump in and read them afterwards or beforehand. That's entirely up to you. We've got lots of stuff to plug that are, again, all in the show notes that will come out throughout. Stick through to the end to find out some really fun, interesting questions that we ended up asking Ken and see how that went. Bhav, before we jump straight into the episode, is there anything you want to plug? Anything going on in the world of Bhav?
There is nothing major going on. I will continue with saying, sign up to Crap Talks. Come along to our events. It's really nice meeting people in the industry. And if you want to speak on one of these podcasts, come speak to me and Dan. We're not that scary, I promise. What about you, Dan?
Amazing. I've got absolutely nothing in the world of analytics to share, but I have just been I've just been shared this artist that I've just been listening nonstop on Spotify, and that's the James Hunter 6. And it was really only shared with me the other day, and I've already been listening to it nonstop. Easy listening, lovely music. If you're interested, give it a go. And just an extension of that, if you are in the world of analytics and you're not already on the Measure Slack, jump on there. It's measure.chat. And within there, there's we're doing a music league. And so people are submitting and sharing songs each week, and we're kind of rating and ranking them each week in different themes. So the whole music analytics crossover continues over there. So feel free to join in. I have a habit of submitting heavy metal songs each week, and they get very little love. So join if you're into the heavy metal and give me some love, please. I think I need it. All right. So today we're joined by Ken Williams of DiveTeam. I just want to say thank you for joining us, Ken. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. I know it's a little bit early for you. So where are you joining us today from?
I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so it's 11 a.m. It's not that early.
Not bad.
Not
so me sipping my beer is going to be slightly odd for you, but you can have your coffee. It's all good.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Well, but Ken, we've crossed paths a couple of times in the past, and I feel like this is something that I may have remembered more so than yourself. But this is back in the days when you were at Search Discovery, and we were on a couple of like Google partner panels trying to give them feedback around their product suite in the very classic Google way, where they listen to the feedback and ignore it completely and do what they want anyway. But tell us a bit about your background. Who are you? What's your experience, and what do you do today?
Yeah, so like most people in like marketing analytics world, I had a completely different past, and I went to business school, got interested in what I would have called data science at the time, like around 2009, 2010. We actually wouldn't have used the word data science back then, but that's what we would call it today. And then I took a job working in a BI team actually originally, and over time switched over to an analytics role, and then worked at search discovery for about 10 years as a consultant. Did all kinds of stuff. So, I was a technical architect, I was a project manager, I managed the relationship with Google for a number of years. I was in charge of Google Analytics 360 sales for a while. So, lots of very focused Google product specialization, but really kind of like broadly marketing, consulting focused. So, like, how can marketers take advantage of data to make smarter decisions is really what we were selling. So yeah, that's my background. And then, last year, I left my former employer and started my own company, DiveTeam. So we're really just kind of focused on bringing in very senior people. So everybody that works with us has at least 10 years experience. And we're focused on data engineering, data science, and analytics primarily. So we're really trying to bring some like sort of specialized senior experienced people in to solve sort of custom problems, as opposed to, a lot of the prior work we were doing was just kind of like tag management. So, we'll get into this a little bit more, but I think there's a little bit of a timing game that we're playing. Like, I think this is becoming more and more important. And I believe that enough that I quit my job to do it on my own. So
how's the journey been so far, Ken?
It's been great. We're 6 months in or so. We officially launched in January, and I was very, very scared, and everything fell into place pretty quickly for us. And I feel extremely lucky. Somebody told me once that starting a business is like 50% working really hard and 50% being very lucky. And I definitely had both of those going in our favor. I would say there's another element of just like having the right people around, and getting advice from people. And a lot of the people who are working with me now just had things in their life that freed them up to work with me. So just lots of things worked out, and it's really going great. So I'm very excited about it.
As someone so last year, Ken, I'm not sure if you're aware, I actually did start my own consultancy. And then sort of like 6 months in, I kind of lost my co-founder, and I decided to go back into full-time work. But I couldn't agree more. I think it's actually 50% hard work, 50% luck, and 50% who you know. Because it's honestly, like, I tapped into my network so hard that it was really helpful just to be able to leverage that. So I think there's probably another 50% in there as well. Which is something, but I'm fairly certain doing a startup is more than 100% work, especially when I used 100% as the anchoring point in comparison to when you've worked in an organization which is quite stable and what have you. So I think, so if anyone says to me like, "But that's not possible," I say compared to like when you're working to a 9 to 5, 200% is easily possible.
Yeah, they're not thinking about percentages in the right way.
No,
so
exactly.
I'm with you.
Well, nor's Bhav according to his 50, 50, and 50 math right
there. Right.
Well, Ken, you go on.
As the person who is newest to this topic and probably the least experienced, I'm going to ask the easy question right off the bat, which is, what is modern marketing, and how does that differ to more traditional marketing?
Yeah, maybe the way to answer that question is to give like the 1 minute background on where like the ideas came from, because I worked, I think, like you guys, in most of the 2010 to 2020 period, I was doing consulting, or I was working in-house like for marketing teams focused on using their data. So that's kind of like what I was doing that time. And then actually, Daniel, you and I had a conversation about this previously, but there was a period where I realized what I'm doing now is really different than what I was doing before. That's really what started this concept of modern marketing. It was just simply based around the idea that the things that I would have told a new person starting out in analytics in 2015 are not the things that I would tell them in 2025. Just the skills are different. The things we're doing are different. The way that we focus on the way we think about the problems we solve is really different. And so I started trying to figure out like, why is that? What's happened? And I ended up spending probably like 4 or 6 months working through a blog post before I finally published it, where I kind of landed on, I think there are environmental shifts that we're going through. And I like to use the word modern just to say currently, the word modern to me is like, this is what is happening now, as opposed to what was happening before, which is really before the barriers to cloud computing were so low. It's really pretty easy to break into cloud computing now relative to just a few years ago. Of course, generative AI has changed a lot of things. We didn't even know what that was not that long ago. The other one is privacy. I think that there's been enough of a shift in demand coming from customers to privacy that the things that we thought of as successful analytics in 2015, which had a lot to do with building a 360 view of a customer, if you've been in those conversations, they're just like, they're not aspirations that we have anymore,
I'm getting PTSD from 360 customer view.
Oh God,
yeah.
my colleague Mark calls it the 330 customer view, because there's always 30 you can't see. So he's always like, the 330 is the best you can get.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty wise. I mean, I would say, I don't know if that like really clearly answered your question. The answer, I'd say modern marketing is just like solving problems that are the same problems we've always solved, which in my mind, I went to business school. So marketing is product, place, price, and promotion. So like how you do those 4 Ps, those Ps haven't changed. We still have to do those things, but like the tools that we use have changed. So modern marketing is really focused on privacy. It's focused on incrementality techniques, as opposed to, the past where we were focusing on amassing customer databases and things like that.
I really like that.
That's a short answer.
No, I think it's a great answer. I think it's a fantastic answer, because so often when we hear the word modern, it's associated with tech stack or data stack. And it's kind of nice to hear about modern being described as current, which is 100% true. That's what, it's everything's always modern at the time or current at the time when you're doing it. But I think also more it's more enjoyable to hear, and kind of nice to hear from my point of view, is that we're talking about sort of like, it's iterative improvements and not like groundbreaking shifts, like, especially if I understood that correctly. Because often people think about like modern and think, oh my God, this is going to be some new disruptive thing and we have to like completely rip up the old playbook and create a brand new one. It's like, no, it's just, you did this like 5 years ago, you did this, now you have to do this, and 5 years from now we'll have to do something else. So I think that was really, really nice to hear. And I think the other thing that you've kind of sparked in me is that 2010 to 2020 are now what I'm going to forever start calling the golden years of marketing analytics.
Yeah. When I think of it, the way that I, in my mind, frame it up, I actually think 2000 is sort of like the key year that I like to point to, because that's when Google Ads came out. And then it's not like a specific year, but there was some period, or AdWords at the time, there was some period where we made a transition from what before that I would say was very focused on, if you're a marketer, you want to get where people are, like get your brand in a department store or on a billboard or on a TV show, like those are the ways you got in front of customers. And when AdWords came out in 2000, it shifted to, oh, wait a minute, now I can target specific individuals. And I think that from about 2000 to 2020, we went down a trajectory of being focused on like building this customer data, thinking about things like multi-touch attribution, which is very much kind of based on like a digital fingerprint, for lack of a better word, like following somebody's digital presence. And then trying to make decisions from that about how well we're performing. At 2020, that around 2020-ish, that changed. And I think probably Safari was the biggest player to kill it, with like the elimination of third-party cookies. There are a lot of other things that happened. I think, we like to talk in the 2000 to 2020 age about digital transformation. I think COVID sort of killed that. Like, there's not that many people who haven't transformed digitally anymore. Um, but yeah. So in my mind, 2000 to 2020 is about 20 years we were on a path that we're really not exactly on anymore. I think some people are struggling to make that transition. So really, that was really the whole concept was about.
So do you think we're regressing then? And I don't mean that in a kind of negative, we're going backwards kind of way, but do you think it's reverting to pre 2000 levels, or is it kind of, are we in a different kind of paradigm again where it's kind of unexplored territory?
That's a tough question because there are definitely some things that we're going back to, and a lot of people point at media mix modeling as like the example of that. Like that was a thing in the 90s, and then we stopped doing it, and now it's becoming important again. I think that the way that I would answer that question is that we're not necessarily reversing, but our priorities are changing. And one way you see that play out is with the way that we measure success. So it used to be socially acceptable to say, I got a return on ad spend of, whatever from my paid search or display advertisement. I don't think that moving forward, many people are going to hang on to that. At least the way we've calculated return on ad spend is just based on like total revenue and total like investment in a marketing channel. I think now people are starting to realize that we really probably were cannibalizing other channels and we weren't really talking about the incremental impact of flipping on that marketing. So that is something that's driving us forward. There's been a lot of studies done on the way that advertising overpromised itself in the last 20 years. I think there's a Freakonomics about this that's interesting to listen to. We kind of were lazy about it in the past, and it's real easy to use a cookie-based approach. It's harder to do a geo test, right? Or a media mix model, or something that actually is a statistically significant way of looking rigorously at your data and figuring out, wow, is this actually benefiting me in any way to spend all this money on this marketing channel? So in that way, I think we're improving.
I think this is one of the things that I keep coming back to, and I think this is something that touches on stuff that I deal with an awful lot. Is that I wonder if it truly did shift priorities, the kind of change that we're seeing now, because ultimately the priority is to be a profitable company, to give good customer experience and not piss them off or do anything illegal, right? I mean, fundamentally, the kind of bottom line for a lot of businesses, all businesses, one would argue, is the same, and that doesn't matter if it was pre 2000 or now, or in that kind of the golden age between 2000 and 2020. What I'm thinking then is I'm just wondering if the adoption of this kind of like prolific technology and monitoring and measurement that we had, especially when it comes to things like attribution modeling, where we're tracking individual people, and back in the days when cookies and browsers were allowing this stuff, it was people, less so nowadays. I'm wondering if that shifted and skewed our perspective of what the metrics are, the KPIs are. So when we were looking at things like total sessions and bounce rates and impressions and view through conversions, actually that skewed the perspective, which now we're being almost pushed backwards to remind ourselves that actually the bottom line is what's important, and actually the methodology of measurement is actually the thing that's interchangeable.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that one of the things that a lot of people, if you were going to analytics conferences a couple years ago, a lot of people were talking about value. How do we create business value? And this is something I was thinking a lot about when I was writing that blog post and starting to publish about this concept. Was we, for a long period of time, made some assumptions I don't think we have anymore. We definitely used to assume that more data is good data. So let's collect everything. I would sit in meetings with clients and I would say, like, what do you want to see here? And they would be like, just collect it all. And then we'll just analyze it any way we want later. And the insights will fall out, And so I think that part of what is shifting is a little bit of burnout on that. Like, I think everyone is kind of hitting this area where we're like, there's a lot of money that's been invested in standing up analytics tools or CDPs or, you name it, tools that are very expensive that then nobody goes on to use. So how are we going to make sure that we're getting some valuable return on our investment for these things? Because to your point, businesses need to make money. And I think that we're a little bit moving in a direction towards, I don't want to capture everything. I want to say what the business is trying to do. maybe we've got a product and it's brand new and we just want awareness. So that's fine. Like, we don't have to push revenue. Like, maybe we're just trying to get people to watch our videos we put on YouTube about our product. That's fine. That's a business objective that you've decided on. So then let's figure out, how do we measure that? And then what data do we need to measure that? And really laser focus on hitting some goals with specific targets attached to them, learning what's going well, what's not, and changing things. And that's where we get into that like iterative improvement concept that I think is really starting to emerge significantly in this period, in a way that in the past, we would just dump a bunch of money into things. At the end, we would try and show the analytics in a way that made it seem like it wasn't a waste. And then we were already moved on to something completely different.
And I saw a blog post or a post on LinkedIn recently, which talked about how click-through rates are meaningless, and people shouldn't, and execs shouldn't be chasing things like CTRs and impressions and things like that. And the author of the post was talking about how we've lost the ability to do brand marketing and things like that. And I disagree to a certain extent, in the sense that we gave up on those metrics a long time ago. They were the metrics that got us, into the door and the seat at the table in discussing analytics at a very exec level. But I think very quickly we realized that those metrics are meaningless unless we attribute them to things like ROAS, to ROI, to CPA, to whatever it might be. So when we talk about, and you mentioned it, you mentioned that ROAS, certainly in the way we traditionally measured it, has it's probably moved on a little bit. I don't think it ever really will. I mean, there will be some type of return that we need to recognize through spending and on marketing channels. I think what's probably changed, and to your point of iteratively, it's just that we've gotten better at targeting the right metrics and looking at the right metrics. I think that's the first evolutionary step. As we move away from being able to do CPAs or cost per clicks, or where it's directly attributable to a keyword or a campaign or an ad, we will still need to be able to show some type of ROI, don't you think? It's just that the tools we use are going to go back to something that the tools we would have used 20 years ago to measure TV campaigns or out of home campaigns, and it's not. I don't think we'll ever really be able to move away from showing value, because I think ultimately there'll be people who care about the value. I think for some for some products like Nike, where it's about brand perception, there will be that ongoing pursuit of excellence in terms of brand awareness and brand recognition and recalls and things like that. But for anyone who operates in a pure digital e-com space, getting that ROI number is always going to be valuable. I think the only thing is now that we're starting to see the bigger picture and how all the pieces get to fit together, and data scientists, whatever you want to call them these days, marketers, analysts, we're all working together to fit all these pieces together. So and you're right, we the CDPs and things like that, we've moved away from collecting everything to just collecting better things. So I don't know, that's my kind of view. I don't really have a question in there. You guys said some interesting things, and I wanted to throw my thoughts in.
I'm just going to jump straight in, because I get your point, but I think there's a key thing which I think is happened, which is defining these metrics. You mentioned ROI and ROAS interchangeably there. And I think when we're looking at ROAS, that's very much an in-product thing. And that's return on ad spend. That's Google Ads telling us how much money they've spent of ours and how much money they've made us back. But actually ROI is looking at, okay, what's the cost of selling this good, and what's the profit we get back, and how much on top of the ad spend did it cost? And I think these are the things where I think it's been going on for so long, even since the year 2000, as you said, when Google Ads came out, in the Google Ads example, where they are defining metrics that they can measure, that they would like us to look at. And actually it's such a big, and it's mad, it's such a big revolutionary thing now for Google Ads to take in profit. And it's this modern, crazy, awesome thing. And you're like, Jesus Christ, we should all be looking at profit. Like, we should all be looking at ROI. And actually, we're now in the year 2024, 24 years after this tool was introduced. And now it's a crazy new novel idea to look at profit. And I think this is where we are slightly blinded to the products and the tools we've been using. Like, every dashboard I've ever seen, a website dashboard, is looking at sessions, users, page views, bounce rate. But I don't think I've ever met anyone that knows the definition of them, let alone understanding the relevance of them. Or, as you said, Ken, which is the most important thing, which I never see, it's one thing having KPIs, but another thing having a target for them. how much is good, how much is bad. And this is a thing that a lot of people don't have. And we're all suckers for marketing in our own way. We've been fed these data points, these metrics from different tools, and that's not our fault. That is just lots of technology feeding us lots of data that we perceive to be important. But actually, I don't know if it is. There's always going to be indicators of, did the content do what you want it to? And it's not always possible or easy or even real time or frequent enough to be able to measure the impact on the bottom line for sure. So things like click-through rates and impressions are still going to be interesting to some extent. But yeah, sorry, that's my rant off the back of your rant, Bhav.
No, I love what you guys are saying. I put together, when I was working on the modern marketing idea, that I think there are these 4 different principles that like sort of define it. The first one is this outcome-based measurement strategy concept. And I always put in a short sentence that says this is defined as abandoning a single source of truth in favor of being flexible and being focused on what you're trying to do as a business, rather than really just taking the things that are easy. So to your point, I do think that a lot of the reason that we would look at things like sessions in the past is because it was just right there. It was provided. It was very easy. You could say something like, hey, we had X number of sessions this month, and last month we had less, so it feels good. But I think that whenever a client asks us to design a dashboard for them, or even if we say we're going to implement Google Analytics and then we're going to provide you one, even without you asking, the thing that we always do is land on what are the 2 or 3 things you care about as a business. So I used that example a minute ago, like maybe we want to build awareness of our brand. Maybe we're trying to improve a conversion rate on a checkout flow, whatever it is. Short term, this quarter or maybe this year, we care about these 2 or 3 things. Then we say, how will we know if we're successful at that? And don't let the data that's available in Google Ads drive how you measure if you're doing that. Think about like, what are we ultimately trying to do? What data will, if we look at these data points, do we feel like best approximate that thing? And then when we deliver these dashboards, we always deliver them in a way where you can see how metrics roll up to some objective that you're trying to accomplish as a business. And every time we do that, 100% of the time, the client's response is, could you reorganize this so I can have one section about paid search and another section about display and another, because that's what everybody wants to do. And it's just a different way of thinking that, I like a lot of my premise to this modern marketing idea is that this is not something I'm pushing. This is something I'm observing. And I'm observing it in small pockets. It's not everywhere. I think most people are still in a mindset of just show me how many sessions I got through, my display campaigns last month. So that being said.
Now, for our long-term listeners, it's no secret that I like to run training courses all around Google Analytics, Tag Manager, and everything in between. Check out a full list of courses over at measurelab.co.uk/training to see all the courses and workshops that we have available. Everything from learning Google Analytics 4 to Google Tag Manager, data visualization, and short-form workshops to cover small specific areas of interest, such as user-provided data, generative AI for data analysis, as well as lots of other stuff. That's measurelab.co.uk/training for all the details, or you can click the link in the show notes, or if you're watching this, scan this QR code now.
I mean, I think this is a really fascinating point because I've just done a piece of analysis for a brand. I won't say on the podcast, but it's the brand we were just talking about that me and Dan seem to be drinking every day of our lives. And the analysis really showed that actually this brand was spending X amount of money on Facebook and Meta, X amount on paid search, but they were also investing in TikTok and YouTube. And they pulled their TikTok spend and started pushing the YouTube spend. But actually, the analysis that I did a regression analysis to understand 2 things. There was a direct conversion analysis, but I was also trying to see what drove and fed into the brand and the PPC brand and the SEO searches. And actually, TikTok was a much better platform. So if you have your direct conversion rate from a platform that you say, this is what we're going to use classic, conversion rate, CPA type metrics to spend on this brand, but we now also have, on this media, but we're also going to spend X amount on these other channels, which we know drive brand awareness. but they didn't have the tools at their disposal. They had the data, they just didn't have the tools. And by tools, I mean knowledge, in-house, things like that, to be able to say, well, actually, does this drive? How do you drive? Like, what is the value of TikTok? What is the value of YouTube? And people always directly use conversion rate because it is the easiest thing to measure. And I understand why they want, as you said, Ken, they want sessions. They want to have these numbers which are easily, you can break it down. But trying to then take a study that is like a regression study of the impact of your TikTok campaign and putting it into a dashboard or something that says, hey, look, it's hard for me to say this is the number, but what I can say is that there is this correlation coefficient or this coefficient in front of your X value that shows that the more you put into this will drive up your Y, which is your brand, which we know converts at a really high conversion rate. But trying to get that into a metric or into a dashboard format is so hard. It sounds really bad, get rid of the old, the old guard of the marketing directors and marketing leaders, we're never going to see this transformational shift into this new way of thinking where we're adopting better metrics and thinking about things holistically outside of this is my PPC campaign, this is my SEO campaign, this is my Facebook campaign. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think what we'll find is that those people who are struggling with adapting to understanding things like how regression is different from what they saw in their like TikTok reports, those people will be replaced over time. And actually, I love the movie Wall Street. Have you guys seen this movie from 1987? So I put this in one of the blog posts I have about modern marketing because I actually didn't watch it until maybe like 2010. And it occurred to me that this movie came out in 1987. It's very much focused on how the finance and really like investment banking world was. I mean, it's focused on insider trading, but the huge like overwhelming theme of the movie is about technology. So everybody who's like really good at investment banking has computers all over their desks, and they're like these old silly looking computers to our standards nowadays. But if you think about it, like personal computers came out like 1980, 79, 78, around then. This movie was only 9 years later. And a lot of it was making fun of people who just couldn't adapt. Because before that, investment banking was about looking for stable companies with a good product. And it became quickly about information, like who's got information the fastest. And I think marketing is going through something similar where we used to be successful by looking at information that you would get from a report provided by your ad platform. Now it's a much better decision to run a regression on your data and find out what kind of impact it's having. And those people who can't transition to that are like people in finance who weren't learning how to use a computer in a lot of ways. So I think over time, there's going to be some people who are like, you know what, I don't want to adapt. I'm happy with the way I learned how to do marketing between 2000 and 2020. And I do think they'll be replaced over time because they're not going to perform as well as their competitors.
But is there an inherent risk there that they won't leave and so the business will tank? Because I think a lot of the stuff when it comes to the modern data stack and thus modern marketing and, the kind of, it makes a lot of sense. The 3 points you said about generative AI changing stuff, privacy changing stuff, and access or entry to cloud computing kind of reducing. There's going to be people out there, businesses that won't see that or don't have that, or they have staff that are unaware or not wanting to address that, the cognitive dissonance of change, right? So is it inevitable? Is there businesses that will continue to just keep cracking on going forward in what they've been doing? Is this an inevitable kind of like success factor? I'm just trying to understand if adapting to this change is something that has to be done, or is it more so for the kind of hyper competitive market and the ones that have got monopolies, the only product in the market, or good brand recognition like Disneyland or Coca-Cola? Would they ever need to worry about this kind of stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think that there is a scale important thing about scale that we should mention, which is that if I'm a coffee shop, I'm not that impacted by cloud and AI and privacy and things we're talking about. But when we talk about a certain scale where you can drive meaningful efficiencies out of it, then I would say, like businesses sort of come and go. And going back to the analogy I gave a moment ago, I'd look back to, those big investment firms in the 70s that decided not to adopt computers. Like, how did they perform moving forward? Today, computing is a huge component of it. And in fact, the reason I like this movie so much is because when I saw it, I was taking a corporate finance class in business school, and we were learning about all the algorithms for tracking like the performance of the market and like your ability to perform above the market. It's called like generating alpha. But that was all brand new. Like, all of the things that we were learning in those classes had been developed since that data became really available in the 80s. And, I think time will tell is a short answer, but I don't think it's going to be a very easy road for people who are making decisions. Going back to the specific scenario we're describing, people who are making decisions exclusively on what TikTok is telling them a smart decision is, without thinking about how can I, like, as a business, if I want to brand awareness, that's one input among many. And how can I better use all of the inputs that I have available?
So if I'm a marketing director and I'm listening to this podcast, which I hope they are, what are the kind of like let's say 3 to 5 things you would say to them? And let's assuming this marketing director is not as tech savvy as you, or not in touch with sort of like modern marketing and analytics practices. What are the 3 to 5 things you would say to them to go in, look at? And I know we've touched on attribution modeling or mixed media modeling or regression, whatever it is. Is there anything else that you think they should go in research as a topic? We're not going to be able to cover all of them, but it would be great if anyone is listening to say, hey, look, Ken's been talking about the modern marketing, and Bhav and Dan have been questioning. What should I go and research?
Yeah, I would say the most impactful thing that anyone can do at any size business is set targets, and I think we mentioned this briefly earlier. Putting some time into measuring what you want to accomplish or defining what it is, like, maybe this is an OKR at a lot of companies. Then putting the creative exercise into answering that question of how will we know if we're doing that? And then setting a goal. That alone is just the most revolutionary thing that, I bring to a lot of my companies, and it seems silly, but it's like, at the end of the day, we can be really confident that we are moving the needle. And when we're not moving the needle, we can have honest conversations about why not, in a way that it doesn't have to be about anyone's pride. Like, everybody's working together. We're not trying to say like this person did a bad job. It's like, no, we're going to evaluate, are we on track? Are we off? What could we do differently? Like, it's more of a culture thing. To me, that's like the number one thing anyone can do. I think to your specific question though, the way that I think that a typical marketer can tiptoe into thinking in a more modern way about performance is to combine incrementality techniques with multi-touch attribution techniques. So what I mean by that is, if I've got Google Ads and I'm running some search campaigns, I'm running display campaigns, I've got YouTube running, and maybe I've got other things happening that are not in Google Ads or in other places. I get instant feedback on when people are clicking on those ads, because I can see they're landing on my website. I can see this campaign is performing better than this one, and I can get a good relative view of what's working. But what I don't know is, does this actually create value for the business or not? I think the concept that you would say, we spent $100,000, we made $200,000 is silly, right? I mean, because there's so many variables in there. There's things like accounting for profit. There's things like accounting for the customers that would have bought from you anyway had you not advertised to them. So it's not helpful for answering that question. It is helpful for optimizing relative performance of the different tactics you have in market. Though the other thing that you can add on then is this incrementality. Like, okay, I'm running I've got a couple geos where I've just turned everything off. Do I see a difference in the areas where I'm advertising versus those where everything is shut off? That's a pretty easy way that you can say, like, yes, Now I can see I got a measurably boost in revenue above what I see when I shut everything off. Like, so doing an A/B test like that, a media mix model is just an A/B test that's like kind of thoughtless, right? It's like, it's just going to look at your historic data and see when you cranked things up and down. Another version is a randomized control trial, which is where you're like just planning. I'm planning to shut off everything in Texas for a week and then shut it back on and crank it up really high. There's all different ways to do this. And then the other thing that is kind of lazy but nice is like a pre-post test. So you just look at the data and say, like, before and after we started doing something, did we create a forecast? We look at our data up to a point we made a change and we forecast the future. Then we look at the actuals and we see if there's a gap between our forecasts and the actuals. So all of those are great techniques. But the idea is that those answer that bigger question of, is this working? And I think that you need that. I think that's very important. It takes some effort to get. And I think you also need to be able to look more quickly at that attribution level data to say, like, okay, this campaign's performing better than that one.
So you've mentioned attribution a couple of times, and I'm going to have to jump in because I feel like I'm about to explode. And I have to ask, my background is in attribution. That's how I cut my teeth in the analytics space before moving into a kind of Google Analytics specialty, I suppose. Attribution can tell you what you want it to say. And we keep talking about things like conversion rates and return on investment or return on ad spend, but all of these can be wildly different depending on the model you pick. So when it comes to attribution, you're saying about combining that there's still an element of the human kind of deciding and picking the one that makes their numbers look bigger. And often things like last click attribution upweights things like search marketing, especially brand marketing, and then kind of makes the things like social and prospecting campaigns look rubbish. So there's still an idea there that we're all going to be reading different things and overlapping each other. And how do you address that? Like, do you have a go-to model that you just say, use this and move on? If you're building these dashboards for your clients that are using and combining attribution techniques with incrementality studies and things like that, like, how do you address that conversation of attribution, not only because there's infinite variety, but also the observability, things like cookies and things like that it's dependent on? They're inherently flawed. I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here because I'm a fan and I agree with you about the attribution modeling, but I think this is what a media mix modeling kind of agency will come in and be like, you absolutely cannot use attribution modeling because of all these reasons. But I'm just wondering what your I suppose answer to that would be.
Yeah, I mean, my answer is that attribution modeling, and I would loosely define attribution as like anything that's based on a cookie identifier that's tracking my behavior, right? So it could be first touch, last touch, but anything in that category, like you mentioned, we know it's flawed, but not only that, it's got these other challenges with things like it only sees its own impact, doesn't take into account things like, would somebody have purchased a product had you not advertised, that kind of thing. I do think that when you're just focused on advertising, as long as you are aware that what I am doing with this data is trying to optimize the relative performance of my different tactics, then I think attribution is really important. Media mix modeling is an incrementality technique that has its place, but it's also important for you to be able to see, I've just pushed out a campaign, maybe it's been running a week. Am I getting the number of click-throughs on this one that I'm getting on that one? If not, maybe my creative needs to change, those kinds of things. I think the attribution model you choose to answer your question should be informed by the channel that you're looking at. So, if I am looking at an acquisition channel, then I probably want to look at a first touch attribution model, because that's the one that really answers the question of, like, are people initially clicking who have never known my brand before clicking through this ad? It's not really perfect because it could be the same person on another device. But if you see over a large number of people that when you slice the data that way, that this campaign performs better than that one, then you can make an informed decision to say, I'm going to shift money into that one, or I'm going to figure out why that one's working and not this one. I don't think attribution is what I would use, to answer the same question as a media mix model. In my mind, media mix model answers this question of, like, what are you getting in return for it, that attribution isn't really trying to answer.
I love that answer. I think it's so true. And I think, Dan, do you remember I tried to bait Tom Goodwin into joining this podcast for a discussion around this? So Tom Goodwin is the person I was referring to. His was a blog post that, for lack of a better word, triggered me. He was talking about, oh, click through rates, this, and if all you're gonna, we need to move away from this click through rate mindset. And I was like, no, well, we have moved away from it. And he was talking about like branding and how he's like never purchased any. He looked around his room. He's like, I've never purchased anything there's nothing in my room that I've purchased that's come after I've clicked on an ad. And by the same logic, I would say, well, I look around here. There's nothing that's that I've purchased that's come from a pretty billboard or some branding campaign. And actually, it's not true. I think in reality, it's a mix of both. And you said it there yourself. I think what he was doing is he's confusing two different things. He's confusing mixed media modeling, where we have to look at the performance of these very quantifiable channels that we never used to have, like radio, press, TV. These are really hard to quantify channels in the past, and we had to use methods like MMM and what have you. And then we couple that now with our ability to be able to track customers and what they click on, and then we bring in things like branding elements, like actually, does this ad look nicer and does it drive more clicks? Yes, if it does, that's great, but is it converting into more value at the end of the day? And if it's not, then we need to go back and reframe. And actually, it needs to be this harmonious or symbiotic relationship between good quality ads that do what they're supposed to do, which is drive sales, but also send the right brand message and build that awareness and stand out from everything else. So I completely agree. And then going back to your points around how combining incrementality techniques with multi-touch attribution and trying to understand the value, man, you're preaching to the choir here. You call it modern marketing, I call it measurement strategy, and we're all working towards the same goal. And as soon when you were talking about it, I was like, where have you been all my life, dude? So again, just some Ken love in there.
So what you're saying, Bhav, is that your approach isn't modern. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that I never would have called it modern. I just would have called it logical. And I came into this podcast thinking that we were going to talk about modern marketing from a tech stack perspective, and actually what you're talking about is like so on point with what I preach about, which is that modern marketing, modern product analytics, modern experimentation is really about quantifying things and having the right measurement in place to track the value that you really care about, and trying to find out how A connects to B, and that for me is what measurement strategy is.
I would call you an early adopter, and I would say
I'm a pioneer, Ken. I'm a pioneer.
You're a pioneer. What I would say I'm trying to do with this modern marketing thing is just give that a name, right? I'm saying that there are people who are really smart who are doing this today. I'm not trying to invent something new that I'm teaching the world. It's more like there are people like Bhav out there who have figured out a smarter way to make decisions. And I'm trying to think about like, where does that come from and how do we communicate what it is to people? And that's really what I'm trying to do with modern marketing.
I mean, I love it for what it's worth. I love that you called it modern marketing.
Well, I'm gonna trademark that, so don't use it again.
I just bought the domain while we
have to pay $1 every time.
I just bought modernmarketing.com.
Ken, I've got one last thing that I want to kind of tee you up for before we start wrapping up and going into some of the fun stuff. So your background is very much around Google Analytics. You were the manager for Google Analytics 360 and a lot of stuff. Now, I have to give you your 60 seconds about Google Analytics 4. What are your thoughts? How do you feel about it? Is it game-changing? Is it crap? Is it awesome? What do you think? Go.
My answer is that I've been avoiding using this language of it's a great data collector, but that's really the way that I'm using it now. I love the way that the data is collected, and I love the integration with BigQuery. And that's all I really do these days. So if someone feels comfortable taking advantage of those tools, which are like really, really powerful, I think it's the best choice out there for the price. But even if you avoid the fact that it can be totally free if your volume is low enough, I think it's a great, great tool. I am very, very frustrated with some of the user interface challenges that everybody struggles with. But I still use it. I still prefer it over lots of alternatives. I will say when clients come to me and they ask for an evaluation, there are times where I might suggest something else just based on what they're trying to do or their skill set, or particularly their comfort using a tool like BigQuery, things like that. It's not a perfect fit for everyone, but that's my answer.
Okay, and one last point, just because you're not at Search Discovery anymore, is GA360 worth it?
Oh, well, yes,
And I don't need the sales pitch. It's a yes,
I'm
no.
not trying to sell you anything, but because I love the integration with BigQuery so much, if you are generating more than a million events in a day, you really need to pay for GA360 so that you can get the BigQuery export. Otherwise, it cuts you off and your data doesn't flow into BigQuery. I have one client who I get an alert like one or 2 days a month because they had a spike and they went over that limit. And it's frustrating because it's like, well, now the BigQuery data is going to look weird. And it's, so once you start bumping up a million events a day, $50,000 is the price, is the starting price in the US. It scales up from there. It's worth it. And it used to be 150,000 starting price. So I still am a fan.
So, like, Ken, we're just going to wind down now. I've just got a couple of questions. So, we're trying something new as we've kind of brought back the podcast. I've got 3 AI generated questions for you based on the impact of your blogs around modern marketing. So, I don't know how well this is coming up. I'm doing this live on the podcast. Right. Question number 1. If you were to create a marketing campaign for any fictional character or universe, who would it be for and why?
A marketing campaign. I mean,
if you had full creative control.
Full creative control. That's tough. I'm a big fan of the show Bob's Burgers. So because it's where my passion is, I would love to do a marketing campaign for that show.
Do you already have an idea at this point, or is it just like kind of like you want to start there and see where it goes?
You know what I would do in that situation is I would get the cast in a room and I would not bring any. This is very modern, by the way. I wouldn't bring any preconceived expectations. I would be like, you guys are some of the funniest people I know. Let's just enjoy talking about what we could do together. And that's how I would approach that. But I would set targets after we got through that.
I like it, bringing it back. Okay, question 2. If you could have any superpower to help you with marketing, what would it be? And I'm going to extend that to marketing analytics and stuff. If you could have the superpower.
If I could have the superpower, it would have to do with time. I think that if I could just add a couple of extra hours to the day, that I could get so much more done. There's so many things that race through my mind all the time about this low barrier to cloud computing conversation we had earlier, that I teach this class on using the Google Analytics data in BigQuery, and specifically in this tool called Dataform. And a couple days ago, we were in this class and we were talking about how it was only 2 years ago that Google Cloud added Dataform. And I was laying out, here's what people used to do before that. Isn't this ridiculous? It's like the tools are making life so much easier. And I'm constantly faced with choices about how to invest my time in kind of like building out new things. And I would love to not have that as a barrier anymore and just have enough time to get in, think thoroughly through all the new functionality that's available, all the ideas that I've got, like just explore it. So there's your answer. Add a few more hours to the day.
I like it. And last one, what is one quirky, I'm reading this verbatim, by the way, so don't hold this against me. What is one quirky or unexpected talent that you have that your audience might not know about?
Well, I have a guitar, but I'm not really a guitar player. I was a drummer for a lot of years, and I hung out with a lot of guitar players at the time, so I've got these relics of that. So yeah, if there was something I could do, to have fun with some friends, I'd love to play drums again. Maybe that's an answer.
Amazing. I think from doing these podcasts for a little while, there's a number of people that play a lot of instruments. I'm wondering if we can get the next Super Week or something like that, like a one-time only band formed or something like that.
Hey, I'm game. In fact, a couple years ago, a lot of people brought guitars to Super Week. So nobody brought a drum set, though. I don't think I'm going to be the one.
Just
to
pots and
drag a drum
pans.
set.
That's it. Round the
Yeah.
round the campfire. Amazing. I promise you that's the end of our AI segment. So thank you for humoring me and our chatbot for doing that. And Ken, before we go, is there any last plugs or anything you want to share or anything that you want to tell the people listening and watching before we start wrapping up?
The only thing I would say is I am really excited about a lot of the cloud work that we're doing. It ties into all this. The reason that I decided this is a good time to quit my stable job and start a business is because I do think that there's such a need for companies to like have some expertise in like how to use cloud, particularly in my world, Google Cloud, to do useful things with your data, like running a regression analysis, like we discussed earlier, but even just like joining data across sources so that you can see how different things correlate with each other. So I'm very excited about a bunch of training that we're launching in this area at DiveTeam. And so that's my thing. If I could plug one thing, I'd plug that. I think it's super, super valuable. So I hope that even if someone's not taking our training, that like people are really staying on top of what's happening in that space.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ken. It's been a pleasure to speaking to you properly and recording it for our audience. Just for our audience, all of the links that we talked about, including links to DiveTeam and the blog posts and everything about modern marketing, will be in the show notes. So whatever app you're in, click the link and it will all be there. Thank you so much again, Ken. Thanks for joining. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the Measure Pod. You can subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this on to make sure you never miss an episode. You can also leave us a review if you can on any of these platforms. We're also over on YouTube if you want to see our lovely faces and our lovely guest faces while we do this as well. Make sure to subscribe to the Measure Lab channel to make sure you never miss an episode as they come out. If you want to leave us a review, that would be hugely appreciated. You can do that on most of the podcast applications, or there is a form in the show notes you can leave feedback directly to me and Bhav. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.